Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano, and our topic this week for episode 36 is authentic leadership, getting to the core of what we are all about. And we have a tremendous guest to shed some light on this topic and so much more. And her name is Hannah Gordon. You probably know her name because she spent time in the NFL and with the San Francisco 49ers over the last 20 plus years. We will talk about her career in totality, and you have to hear what she has accomplished. She's an advocate for winning authentically. Named one of football's most influential women by NFL.com, Hannah has been recognized as Sports Business Journal's 40 Under 40 and Game Changer, the Athletic NFL 40 Under 40, and there are so many more awards and recognition. She's also written a book called SZN of Change. It coaches you through 8 weeks of vision setting, game planning, and endurance to win authentically in life. We will go into detail on her book and so much more. The conversation begins now, and we start by talking about something very important: family.
A lot going on right now because I had a baby 11 weeks ago, and I have a 22-month-old also, so it's a very busy household these days. But honestly, that's what's going on. So that is taking 24 hours a day right now, which is very different for me after the last 20 plus years in football in my career, to take a little break and really be present with them. But I'm loving it. So that's what's happening over here. How are you, Chris?
I'm great. Thank you for asking. No, I'm doing wonderfully out here on the East Coast. So what was it like, Hannah, to make that pivot after 20 plus years and understand that, hey, I'm going to devote time to family, but I'm so proud, I assume, of everything that you have accomplished?
Yeah, honestly, the decision was so easy. And people kept asking, and people were really shocked, first of all, because I think no one sort of had me pegged as somebody who would pause in their career, because I've always been devoted, I would say, to the work and to the people. And I love what I did at everywhere that I've ever been, including with you at the Raiders. But I think sometimes when you know. And it was just so clear to me that this was the moment and the time to do this. And when else would I have this opportunity? And I think because I had my daughter during the pandemic, and I went back to work with my brain, but not my body, as all of us did, right? Over Zoom, et cetera, 3 weeks after she was born. But I also was able to physically be with her until she was about 6 months old by breaking up my leave. And because we were in Omicron and, we were all working from home. So I already had some perspective on what it was like. And the thing that was so clear to me from having one baby is that it goes so fast. Like, I just couldn't believe how quickly the days and weeks and months went. And I didn't want to miss any of it, because my career will always be there, but they will not always be babies. So that was how that decision was made.
So that takes a wonderful presence of mind, right? That to understand that these are finite moments when we have small children or other milestones in our lives, but most importantly, though, those small children, right? So you're working and you're working hard at the 49ers, and you're advancing that forward-thinking organization and so many great things that they do in the community and things I know that you stand for. Was there a singular moment, Hannah, or was it an evolution of a thought process and with your heart and mind to make the decision, hey, it's time to be with family, as you just said?
Yeah, no, there wasn't a singular moment. It really was just sort of became more and more clear the closer I got to the birth of my second child, as I was trying to plan out what the leave would look like. And I realized that it wasn't just going to be leave, that that this was a pivot and a turning point and a time to pause. And I had actually recently rewatched Sheryl Sandberg's original viral TED Talk on, it wasn't at that time called Leaning In, but there are essentially 3 principles that she talks about. The first was pulling up to the table, like showing up, being unafraid to use your voice. And that was always part of my experience. Second is choosing a partner who supports your career. So there have been Harvard business studies on this. It's not children that derail women's careers. It's their choice of partners. It's choosing a partner who prioritizes their career over yours. And then the third was don't leave until you leave. And I think for me, that's been so true. Like I was all in until I was like, okay, now not only am I not all in, but let me just stop altogether, because I'm not the type of person to do something halfway. So I'm 100 in one direction, or it's like full stop, let's go another direction. And because of the investment I had made early on, I had so much leverage essentially to be able to manage being a mom and working. And I was in a place where I could decide when meetings were happening for the most part, right? Most meetings I was in, I might be the highest ranking person in the meeting, or I might be with a peer. I could decide, in large part also because I was in such a supportive organization, what time I come in and what time I leave, because everyone knows I'm going to get the work done, right? I had already built up those credentials that I could be trusted to do all of that. And so I really encourage young women in particular, because so often I see them, say at 21 years old, when they're not actually wanting to even have kids till they're 30 plus. Oh, well, let me choose a job that has work-life balance because, 9 years from now, I might want to have kids. Well, over that 9 years, you are losing money, you are losing status, you are losing promotions and roles, because you've already stepped back when you don't need to do that for another decade, maybe. And if you invest early, you actually have more power to determine what flexibility you want and what situation you want. So that's my negative advice for people who are going to want to create a different balance later on.
How did you do it? How did, out of UCLA, and then you went to Stanford to get your law degree, but how did you navigate your career through the different stages, and where you rose obviously to chief legal and administrative officer of the San Francisco 49ers? What was your strategy, and how did you do it?
Well, in terms of strategy, I do think I had a very clear vision for what I wanted and where I wanted to go. And I had a great example, quite frankly, when you and I started to work together at the Raiders, in Amy Trask. So as a student at UCLA, I was working for the student paper there covering sports, was really passionate about football, which is what I was covering. I was lucky enough to land a public relations internship at the Oakland Raiders. When they were the Oakland Raiders, and that was right by where I grew up. I was able to come in every day in the summer, and there were so many people who really nurtured me there. For one, the late Craig Long, may he rest in peace, such a wonderful, amazing man, as well as Mike Taylor, who's still with the Raiders, Janelle Fondry, who went on to have a million different jobs and who I'm still friends with to this day. And then Amy took all of the interns, legal interns and PR interns were like the main interns at the Raiders in the summers during training camp. And she took all of us out to ice cream because she loved ice cream. I love ice cream. And she gave great advice. And it was really the only example in the entire NFL of a woman who wasn't part of an ownership family, who was in a chief executive president type of role. So I feel very lucky that I had that example in front of me. And she said something that helped me navigate that strategy. She said at that gathering of interns that when you are from outside of the traditional power structure, be it that you're female or a person of color, LGBTQ plus, whatever it may be, maybe you come from a military background, it is very helpful to have a piece of paper that legitimizes you to the power structure. Essentially, to have a degree, an advanced degree, especially from an institution that gains respect, in order to have people say, "Oh, she's credible," not because of something I said, but because I have a law degree from Stanford. And the reality is, even if that's not how the world should work, it is how the world works. And so that realism and that kind of piece of advice definitely seeded in me the desire to get a law degree. And so after college, after those internships, I went on to work first for the NFL Players Association, doing online content for them. And then for the University of California at Berkeley, doing media relations. And while I was there, I was applying to law school. When I got into Stanford, I quit my job so that I could also get an internship in the agency side of the business, because I was trying to get as much experience in different parts of the business that interested me as possible. So I knew I was interested in communications, be it on the media side or the PR side. I knew I was interested in the contract negotiations, be it on the agent side or the team side. So I was able to work at Octagon before starting law school at Stanford. And then while I was at Stanford, I came back to the Raiders as a law clerk, as well as working at a firm that did a lot of work for the NFL. So again, when you're talking about sort of strategy, there was a lot of research, right, into where are the places that I should be getting experience that are part of this network, part of this world. And so my law clerkship was at Aiken Gump in Washington, D.C. for a partner named Dan Nash, and a woman of counsel, who I believe is now a partner, named Stacy Eisenstein, who did a ton of the outside grievance work and who are incredible mentors to me. And then after law school, I worked at Latham Watkins in San Francisco, and then on to the NFL Management Council, which is part of the league. It's the collective bargaining arm of the league. So it deals with all of salary cap, player contracts. And during the time I was there, when this is not strategy, this is luck, I happened to be there at the end of a collective bargaining agreement, the uncapped year that came after that, the lockout that came after that, and then landed at the 49ers just as that was ending. So that was an incredible learning experience for a few years there, and then spent 12 years at the San Francisco 49ers.
I love all the things you just said, but I truly appreciate how you gave credit to Amy Trask for saying those wonderful words of encouragement at the ice cream in Alameda there. And Craig Long, God rest his soul, and Mike Taylor, Janelle Fondry, wonderful people we were fortunate to have as colleagues at the Raiders. I really appreciate that. So you're on your journey and you're getting the law degree and you're developing experience and getting internships and jobs and moving around and appreciating the agency side, as you saw. And then you were at the right place at the right time, right? At the end of the lockout, per se. Many times we look at our credentials and we say, okay, that's why they hired me. But Hannah, you had to get these jobs. What was it about you in the interview process? Because there's a lot of emerging leaders listening to us right now. And they want to know, yes, she went to undergrad at UCLA. She has she was in the process of getting her law degree at Stanford and then achieved it. But what was it about you and those one-on-one conversations with a partner at a law firm or somebody at another company? What was it that you had in your way of delivering your story and your authentic self to them that you think got you these milestones as you began to have your career unfold?
Well, as you said that, one of the things that came to mind is I don't think it was solely the interview. So when I look at a lot of the jobs that I got, as you know, it's a very small networked industry and your reputation kind of goes before you. And so, yes, it's, the people that you know, but what they think of you and what they say about you is based on your work product. So, for example, the job at the NFL Management Council, I was recommended for that by Dan Nash, who I worked for at Aiken Gump. And would my resume have risen to the top of the pile in HR without it? I don't know. Maybe not, right? Because there's so many people who apply for those jobs. And then the job at the San Francisco 49ers, I didn't apply for. I don't even know that it was ever posted or listed. It was from working with me at the NFL that Parag Morate, who's the EVP of football operations and the president of 49ers Enterprises, and I will never forget because I wanted to go work at a club after the management council. And I saw him at the combine in, 2011. And he said, oh, have you ever thought about, going to a club? And I remember thinking, oh gosh, I really hope that, that there's a job there someday, or that this conversation and a couple months later, he called me and he said, is your door closed? And it's way too late for an anti-tampering violation. So, leave them alone. And at the time it was during the lockout, I thought, oh gosh, the 49ers must have broken one of our lockout rules. And I said, hold on, let me close my door. I closed my door and he said, would you be interested in applying and being interviewed for a role we're creating to be the director of legal affairs? We haven't had somebody in a legal role on the business side for some time. You would report into our EVP, who is both at the team, but also she lives in Ohio. She's not moving out here. She's represented the family for 20 years, Patty Inglis. And I said, oh yes, I would be very interested. And that's how I ended up at the 49ers. I had an incredible conversation with Patty. And I guess I do know the answer to your question about interviews because Patty told me in that interview on our very first phone conversation that she needed someone who, if if there was kind of an alarm to pull, if there was something that really escalated to the point that she would know, that they would sort of scream in the night, that they would, know what they were doing, be competent, but also know when to escalate a situation and have excellent judgment. Judgment for her has been, always will be the most important thing to her. How good is your judgment? And so how did I convey that to her? Gosh, I'm not sure that I remember how I convinced her, whether it was through specific examples. But when you ask about these interviews, I think it all comes back to people, to the work you do, to how that precedes you. And then when you are connecting with a new person, to having a genuine connection with them, and being able to answer. I can certainly say, on the side of being an interviewer so many times, being able to answer questions with specific examples. Sometimes people just talk in generalities, and that can make it really hard to gauge how they would actually handle situations. And it just makes it harder to judge them as a candidate, I think.
You said something right here that I'd like to expand upon. Okay, you have hired many people. Mm-hmm. So when you sat across from a potential candidate, how did you phrase your questions? What was your overall approach to hiring people? Because like you said, you've done it so many times. What was your line of questioning? And you said something very interesting that could be useful to people, is specificity is key. Don't be general. Tell us a story. Because I've done a lot of hiring myself, right? And you're so right on that. But could you give folks a little bit of an inclination as to how to do that, or how you thought about that?
Yeah, certainly when I'm interviewing people, I will, toss up the softball, because I want everyone to be their best self, right? And I will say, can you give me an example of when, or, tell me a story about XYZ. But I also sometimes will give people scenarios. So obviously I've hired people in a variety of types of roles and kind of verticals. So it's going to be specific to their industry. But if there have been things that maybe have been faced already in that department, give people a specific scenario so they can show you how they think through things. What would you do in this situation? Blah, 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 blah. And then let them tell you how they think through it. And this may be, a little bit of like law school exam type of thinking in terms of issue spotting, but you want to see, how do they think? How do they, when given a situation on the spot, respond to that?
That is very helpful to people. So how would they respond to a certain situation? So as you went on with the interview and you're looking to hire them or not, what would be something that would be a no, that is not something that maybe I don't think that they would fit within our culture here at the 49ers, the NFL, or other places?
So I always rely on three things that I learned from Peter Rucco at the NFL Management Council. He said, when you're hiring people, you're building a team, you want to make sure that they are, number one, smart. That is important to me. Number two, hardworking. And number three, and most importantly, that they have integrity. And that can be very hard to determine in an interview. So some of that, it may rely on some reference checking. Some of it is, your gut. Some of it may be scenarios they give people to see, kind of where their ethical compass is. But Peter used to always say, it's obviously, it's a huge bummer it doesn't work out if the person's, not smart or they don't work hard. But what's really dangerous is when you bring into your organization someone who is very smart and very hardworking and is not a good person. Somebody who's a snake, or they're going to undercut the team, or it's all about them, or they're dishonest, like that can destroy then the whole culture that you're building. So I keep those lessons in mind.
Hannah, you just said something so profound. Let's look at this. So if they're very smart, they do great work, but you said, and let's just sum it up, they're toxic. Let's just be honest. How did you handle coworkers or people in situations? Please don't tell me where, because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But how did you handle that? Because you're way up here. You're in the C-suite, right? And you're figuring how to maneuver and get these organizations or companies to the next level. But you have these real life situations. How did you deal with folks like that?
I think all of us face these situations at all levels that we've been at. And so, you have a different amount of, if you've made the mistake and you've hired the person and you have the power to remove them from the organization, then what you have to do is recognize that you made a mistake and help exit them gracefully. If it's a peer I'm a big believer that you kind of meet people where they are, and you just have to know who people are. And you're going to run into people in your life where you don't have control over the fact that you have to deal with them, and that maybe they are a toxic person. And so you're going to need to make some mental peace with that and just know who they are and not let it eat you up, because that's going to destroy your energy that you bring, especially if you're a leader, to your whole team. And then you just navigate from there, and you don't let it change who you are. And I think that's one of the hardest parts, because when you're in a situation like that, it can start, especially if the culture is kind of spreading, or if it's a culture that's like that. If the whole culture is like that, you probably need to remove yourself from that culture and find somewhere else to be. But if it's narrower, it's just one or two people somewhere, then, and also if it's your boss, you need to remove yourself from that workplace. If it's narrower, you just need to find a way to not let it change who you are. And really, no matter who the person is, it needs to not change who you are.
Yes, great advice. Hannah, what is your leadership style? How would you describe it?
Oh, I always find these questions so difficult. And one of the reasons is it always sounds so like self-aggrandizing. Because I'm like, leadership to me is kind of like brand. So brand is what other people say about your product, who you are when you're not in the room, right? And leadership style is really just part of your brand, right? What does everyone else who I've ever led say my leadership style is? There's going to be some people who probably don't like it or have certain words that maybe I don't like to describe it. There's going to be other people that I'd say the most positive words I've ever heard are probably like empowering, coaching. I think I prefer to ask questions and challenge people on the directions they want to take things, as opposed to just being like, hey, this is what we're doing. But there's also times, I'm a huge fan, somewhere in that bookshelf is both of Ben Horowitz's books. And I am a big fan of Ben Horowitz. And I do think there are times when you do actually just have to tell people, this is where we're going. And I need you to get on board, especially, he talks about sort of like wartime and peacetime CEOs. And there are going to be situations where, you do need to be tough. And so I would say tough but big-hearted is probably how I would describe myself.
Tough but big-hearted. I love it. I really like that. Okay, Hannah, tell us what you're doing now, because you wrote a book in November of 2020. I have it right here, SZN of Change. And it's about, well, let's let you describe what it's about, because it's journaling and strategic and getting people to get to their authentic self. But you tell us, please.
Yeah, so it's the competitor's playbook for joy on the path to victory. So it is 8 weeks to get you to where you want to be, but also to enjoy that journey. Right? We're not just reaching for the brass ring and being miserable along the way. And really it came up because I was meeting so many young people, as you do, who are like, how do I get where you are? Or I want to do this. How do I do this? And so I really wanted them to have a practical tool. I'm a big believer that, we go to, a TED Talk or whatever, and I do love TED Talks. But oftentimes we're just listening and we go, oh, that was amazing. I'm so inspired. And then a week later, we haven't done anything with that information. So I really wanted people to have something where you're doing something with the information yourself, and you're doing it long enough to develop some new habits. That's why it's an 8-week guided journal. So it's split. Each week is a different theme. And the themes are really what I have learned from football that applies to all of life. So you don't have to be a football fan to read it. You don't even have to know anything about football to read it. But these are really the life lessons that got me to where I am. And have allowed me to not just be where I am, but to be happy where I
am. And one of them is self-scouting. And that is a football term, and you emphasize that. Very important. Tell me about your personal concept of self-scouting, because that's kind of what we're talking about today. We're looking back, we're being introspective, and you're sharing some incredible wisdom with us. But tell us about that self-scouting.
Yeah, so that's the first week, because to me, it is the basis of all leadership. And to be a leader, we have to lead ourselves first, right? So when we talk about film studies, self-scouting, we're talking about really looking in the mirror. Who am I? Having self-awareness. Awareness, not only of what other people think, but an awareness that's like a deep, truly from yourself, right? And knowing yourself in a way that no one else maybe even knows you. And recognizing your strengths, your weaknesses, where you might like to improve. And to me, that can come from a lot of places. One can be being open to feedback, right? So feedback from our friends, our family, our colleagues. That could be something as formal as a 360 or 360 review process, or as informal as just asking, hey, what do you see as my strengths and weaknesses? It could be using tools like Gallup Strength Finder. There's all kinds of specific tools you could use, disc profiling, etc., to learn more about yourself. And then I'm a big fan, and I'm not shy about it. I think everyone benefits at some point in their life from trying out some form of therapy. So really like digging into not just how do I show up at work, but who am I as a whole person? And how does that influence then how I show up in the world, including in places like our workplace? Because I remember I was very young in my career, and a colleague was going through a really nasty divorce. And it showed me at this sort of very early stage how things that are happening in your personal life are very likely to spill all out in your professional life if you are not really aware of yourself, what you're experiencing, how you want to show up for others, how you either are going to choose to compartmentalize or maybe choose to process in a different way. But again, when we have that self-awareness, we're able to show up the ways we want to for people in our workplaces. And when we lack that self-awareness, then whatever our most negative kind of selves are likely to show up somewhere at some point, and often in times of stress or conflict, whether it's a stressful time in the office or a stressful time in your personal life.
What you're saying, Hannah, if I'm hearing you correctly, is if you do the work, whether it be through therapy, whether it be through your book and the 8 weeks of journaling, or whatever the work is for you, you can be able to show up authentically for yourself because you're doing that work.
Journaling is free therapy, for one thing. And it is an incredible self-reflective process. Authors like Julia Cameron, and I take this from her, have said, you can only lie to yourself on paper for so long. So there's a lot of like self-talk that we do. We may be convincing ourselves, for example, like, this job is okay. I can deal with that toxic person you were talking about. And you can kind of like say that in your head, but the more that you write, what is coming out is going to essentially, you are reading it, right? Like you are seeing it come back to you, and it offers a mirror that is truly unique. And so I highly recommend journaling to everyone.
What you just said is you can't lie to yourself in writing. So tell us what else you're doing, Hannah, professionally. Like tell us about consulting or anything. You tell us what you're doing.
Sure. I mean, right now I really am just focusing on family. I'm a senior advisor to the president of the 49ers through this season. And then eventually I'll decide, what it is I want to do later. But right now I'm really just trying to explore like what is out there in the world. I was saying to someone yesterday, I sort of feel like when Barbie left Barbie Land to like go see what the real world is. I've been living in football land for 20 years and I love it. But there is a part of me that's been really curious about, all the things that are out there in our world, but also outside of the sports and entertainment space and the NFL specifically. But most days I'm pretty consumed by the little humans that I'm trying to really be present with in this fun time. And my daughter yesterday said, "I love you" for the first time. And that was like, my little heart melted, but also she had just learned our first names. And so I always imagine this like, "I love you, mommy" moment. She goes, "I love you, Hannah." I was like, "Oh, okay." I'm so touched. And also that was weird.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh my gosh, Hannah. That's awesome. That's just wonderful. All right, Hannah, you ready for the all-star moments? If anyone can handle this, it's going to be you. I'm going to use baseball here. You're going to hit these out of the park. Are you ready?
I love
fast. Okay. Yes, rapid fire, and you get all 7 questions. I don't always ask the last one to everyone. So the 6 are the core. This has been awesome. Okay, here we go, Hannah. 1, how do you deal with adversity?
Through perseverance.
2, how do you give yourself fuel?
Sleep.
3, what does never give up mean to you?
My DNA.
4, what is the value of collaboration?
It's the only way the human race survives.
5, what do you look for in an ideal candidate?
Smart, hardworking, integrity.
6, describe yourself as a leader in one sentence.
Tough but big-hearted.
7, what is the difference between a manager and a leader?
Oh, it's so hard to keep this one short because I really feel like we have this whole like paradigm in leadership talk about how like you don't want to be a manager, you want to be a leader. And I will say I grew up a shy little girl who had no interest in leadership because I thought leadership was this thing that for some people it is, where it's about ego and power. And really, I've come to love it and fell into it because it's about people and it's about affecting change. So to me, the questions are always when somebody says I'm a leader, I never would even say I'm a leader because I don't think leadership exists in a vacuum. Who are you leading and what are you leading them towards? Those are always my two questions, right? Anyone can lead in any particular situation. It's not a title and it's not an intrinsic characteristic that people are born with or not. It can be developed. And so I think to be responsible leaders, we always need to be asking ourselves who it is that we're leading and what is it that we're leading them towards.
Awesome. Hannah, this has been fantastic. Just a tremendous conversation. I thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a true pleasure.
And we thank Hannah very much for being on the show. My number one takeaway is this. It's under the headline of doing the work. As leaders, we have to do the work to get to where we want to go. That's what this conversation was about with Hannah. Now, specifically with her book, SZN of Change, is journaling and focusing on writing down how you're showing up, what your worries are, what your goals are, and all the elements that we talked about with her strategy as outlined in her book. And this quote that she cited, quote, "You can only lie to yourself on paper for so long." That is extremely valuable in my opinion, and I am so glad that Hannah shed that light on us today. I hope you agree. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, I am Chris Gargano. We will see you next week, everybody, with another great guest. Thank you so much for being part of Keep the Line Moving.
We thank you for listening to Keep the Line Moving. We would love it if you subscribed or left a review. For more podcast episodes, check out our YouTube page. If you'd like to work with the Gargano Leadership Group, check out our website. This has been a GLG production, copyright 2023. For our podcast producer, Paul Salazar, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal. Have a great week, everyone.